The Mariners have been one of the most, if not the most, active teams in baseball this winter. Today, Colby and I are going to power rank each of the 15 40-man roster moves they have made. That's right, even the waiver claims. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Tuesday, February 13th, 2024. This is Titan Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn, that's LOCKEDON, to get yourself started. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you're part of the crew and rock with us every single day, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. You can now get a free 7-day trial to check out the show. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description of this episode. And on today's episode, Colby and I are going to be individually ranking each of the Mariners' 15 40-man roster moves they have made this winter. That is not including the waiver claim of Kaleb Ort, because as we established last week, Kaleb Ort, not a real person.
It's because Ty's lazy.
Not a real person.
How hard would it have been to just put Kaleb Ort at 16 and we move on?
He doesn't exist, so why would I put someone who doesn't exist on the list?
I've purchased his baseball card. He's very much real.
I refuse to acknowledge that. Colby, who's your number 15?
Kaleb Ort.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. Number 15 is the technically trade, more technically
glorified waiver claim.
Yes. For Cody Bolton is my number 15. Like, I bet most of you don't even know who that is. Don't remember that move because it was so minor that not even Ty and I would do an emergency pod about it.
Right. You tried. I remember you trying to get me to do it.
That's because I am, as we all know, the man of the people.
Yeah.
So, Cody Bolton, not a lot to go on here. He's on the 40-man, but I would venture to say he's actually below some of the non-40-man bullpen options the Mariners have brought in on minor league deals. On the pecking order. I don't know if he's going to survive spring training. I don't know if he's going to get to spring training because it's always possible the Mariners acquire somebody in the next day or two, and he's the guy they choose to DFA. But, there is some, fastball is okay, and he's got a pretty good ability to spin a breaking ball. And the Mariners have done quite a bit with pitchers with similar profiles. And like we say, anytime the Mariners acquire a pitcher, you should pay attention. And Bolton is just another attempt at fixing somebody that other organizations haven't had a lot of luck with. So there's some skill here, but again, I would guess he's below somebody like Crable and Butchery and a few other the minor league arms that they brought in for camp, and I'd be pretty surprised if he's not one of the first 2 or 3 guys DFA'd if the Mariners were to make a couple moves throughout spring training, but we'll see. You never know. All it takes is one bullpen, and you can really open up the eyes of a lot of people. So, because that's what spring training is. It's just, you see that curveball on video, this guy's amazing, even though opponents hit like 500 against the curveball. Right. So, we'll see how it goes for Cody Bolton, but yeah, it's just like the least consequential and just kind of like move of the offseason.
Coming in at number 15 for me is the Jarred Kelenic trade.
You mean the Jackson Kowar trade?
Sure. Fair. I am a big Jackson Kowar guy, as we've established. Right.
Apparently not.
So yeah, like I said, I like Kowar. I really like Cole Phillips as well. Fun prospect. And I'm pretty firm in the belief that Jarred Kelenic was getting traded this offseason no matter what, even if the Mariners had all the money in the world and they didn't necessarily need to dump the contracts of Marco Gonzalez and Evan White. And I'm not losing sleep over losing Marco or Evan in this trade. I wish the best for both of those guys. Really appreciate everything Marco did for this organization, of course. Love Marco, wish him nothing but the best of luck in Pittsburgh. But what this trade ultimately represented, it's not great optically. It was arguably the lowest point of this entire offseason for the Mariners. And again, while they were going to trade Kelnick no matter what, the reason behind the way that they actually traded him is very disappointing.
It's number 14 for me. I call it the Jackson Coar trade because I'm just a bigger fan of him than you are, apparently.
Right.
And let's not pretend that Cole Phillips isn't anything. He is a very
Right.
interesting arm. So yeah, they were going to trade Kelnick, and they weren't going to really have a role for Marco. Like basically, Marco was going to be Austin Voth, that we'll talk about here, and I don't know at some point. And Voth is cheaper and probably just as good. Evan White, his time to run out in this organization, and you wish them luck and all that. But this was about, is it better to trade? Let's say you can get like Coar and Phillips and, like a top 30-ish prospect for just Kelnick. Like, would you rather have the extra top 30 prospect, or would you rather have the, $18 million or whatever, when you don't know, if you're going to need that money or not? It's you could see why they would just thought this was a simpler route. But yeah, obviously, it was probably the maddest Mariners fans have gotten this offseason, and our numbers reflect that. So yeah, it's certainly like the lamest trade because just what it represents. But honestly, I don't think they did terribly in the deal. And since they've more or less replaced Kelnick with a player with a better track record than Jared Kelnick, even, I think the loss of this trade is pretty minimal.
So coming in at number 14 for me, and I know you and I disagree on this, but I felt like this needed to be here because there are consequential trades that are good for the Mariners that are going to be higher on this list. Then there's the inconsequential moves, which are like the back end of the 40-man moves that they made, like, the waiver claims and stuff like that. And then there's the consequential trades that were maybe not terrible for the Mariners roster overall now that we have the full picture, but still bad optically. So the Suarez trade comes in at number 14 for me. I'm biased. All right. That's why this trade is so low. I'm a Gino fan. I'm sad that Gino's gone. I love Gino. Gino was one of my favorite players over the last couple of years on the Mariners. That said, though, I'll acknowledge that, like the Kelnick situation, I feel that the Mariners would have traded Gino no matter what this offseason, because there are valid reasons for trading him. The bat speed is a legitimate issue. I think they truly felt that Gino had hit a cliff. You also just can't have your everyday third baseman slugging below 400. Just can't have it, no matter how good defensively he was. But again, that said, it's not really an overwhelming return. Solid backup catcher in Sebi Zavala. Carlos Vargas is an interesting arm, but he might be just another guy that throws hard but can't find the strike zone consistently. We'll see. And at least some of this trade was undeniably motivated by dumping his salary. Now, it is, from just the front office's perspective, a major win for them to be able to dump his entire salary because of what we would assume is the flexibility that created for them and allowed them to do some of the other stuff that they have gone on to do this offseason. But the fact that had to be, at least to some degree, a driving force of this trade puts this deal further down the list for me as well, in combination with the fact that, again, I'm just a Gino fan. I'm really sad that Gino's not here.
I'm not crying. So yeah. Anyways, what are we on, number 13? One more for this segment?
Yeah, so this is kind of all the moves that we can just kind of bunch together. I don't know if necessarily the rankings matter. So I'm going to go 13 Snyder, 12 Bolton, 11 Livera, 10 Kanan Smith and Jigba, and 9 Austin Voth. What about you?
Livera, Snyder, Smith and Jigba, and Voth.
Okay. All right, so we got all of that out of the way. Now we get into the fun stuff in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into an MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Again, that is ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen. And as a reminder, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And before we get back into our Mariners move rankings, just a quick reminder that we're going to be starting up a new giveaway next Monday. So keep an eye out for that. We just got the thumbs up for that on all the legal stuff. So we'll tell you more about it next Monday. So be sure to tune in for that. All right, let's get back into our rankings. So we've done the first, 7 moves?
Yeah, 10 through 15.
Yeah, 9 through 15, right? So we did 9. Whatever.
I didn't do 9.
Okay, so you're number 9 then, because I did 9.
No, okay. My number 9 is the acquisition of Sebi Zavala and Carlos Vargas.
Okay.
Because first of all, Sebi Zevi is awesome. Let's not forget.
Right. Okay. Sure.
Second of all, Gino's toast. Like, now here's the deal.
Okay.
Gino's probably going to go down to Arizona and he's probably going to hit, 25 homers again. Just because that ballpark is much better to hit in than T-Mobile Park is. But the bat speed is virtually non-existent. It's one of the slower bats in baseball all of a sudden. And basically his entire value last year was propped up on him being something he's never been before, not even close. Never been a Gold Glove caliber third baseman, never been close to that. And last year he was. Mm-hmm. At 32 years old, is it more likely that the defense reverts back to what it usually is? Or is it more likely that he finds bat speed at 32 years old and turns into, the 450 slugging third baseman? I think we know the answer. I think there's a very real probability that Gino strikes out 30% of the time, probably hits 25 homers, but slugs right around 400, hits 210, and is a mediocre third baseman. That's not a good player. And that's a player that's worth less than the package you got. So, and you got the Diamondbacks to take on all of that salary, which again, unfortunately, matters. So you upgraded your backup catcher. You definitely have somebody more reliable than what you had last year. You have a plus defensive catcher, and you get a really interesting arm who ends up being, I don't want to say pretty important, but he ends up allowing you to make another move further up, more easily make another move further up our list. So sure. I think that's important too. So, I like Gino too. I don't pretend he was anything that he wasn't last year. Like, he was a good defensive third baseman who had no business playing every day and hurt his team with his bat. That's who he is. He's a great dude. Wish him luck. I would love to be wrong and he have a bounce back in Arizona. I don't think the Mariners are wrong here. I think they made the right move. Could they have gotten a little more if they had some of his salary? Maybe. But would it have been significantly more? I kind of doubt it. I think the league is with the Mariners, and they look at Gino and they say, if he's not cooked, he's pretty darn close. Like, it's about over for him.
Who's your number 8?
Trade for Samad Taylor.
Okay. We're in agreement on this, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, like, first of all, called it. It was all me. I thought of that first. Nobody else had it.
Such a big brain.
Well, I mean, it was the day after you were still chasing your clout. So, I had to put you in your place.
Right.
Now, Samad Taylor is interesting. He is basically what Samad Taylor is that he is Sam Haggerty's replacement in the org after this year, because after this year, Haggerty will be out of options. He'll also be making like $1.5 million, $2 million, and Taylor is not going to make that. He's got all of his options left. They're very similar players. They both hit lefties pretty well. You probably don't want to face a ton of righties. They both are okay defensively in the outfield. They could both play some second in a pinch. They could both steal some bags. Like that's who they are. They're the same player. And the Mariners got him for like cash, like may a player to be named later. I mean, maybe this changes if in 3 months we find out they traded, Cheater Martinez for him or something like that. But based on the information we have now, I think this is a really good move to kind of solidify depth and give you more options and to put more roadblocks in front of the potential like need to call up somebody like Ryan Bliss before he's ready. So I think this is just a really good depth move. And it's the type of stuff that, we've talked about with them wanting to do at the end of the off season. It's just like keep on adding depth to your roster instead of just being like, well, we claim Cooper Hummel. Like that's good enough, right? Like, no, add players who could actually help you in multiple ways. And so the Taylor one is pretty interesting for that reason.
Yeah, I love this deal because it's going out and getting a little too much on the back end of your 40-man roster, which is a good thing, right? It's again, it's further pushing those options down, which is also a good thing because injuries are naturally going to crop up over the course of a 162 game season. And now you are further and further and further removed when you make moves like this from getting to a point where you have to pull another Jose Caballero or Mike Ford out of thin air. So love this deal, and I love the upside of Samad Taylor. I'm not sure if he can hit. I mean, he's hit at every level of the minors, and he only has 69 nice career plate appearances at the major league level. So there isn't really any sample size to make any sort of conclusion off of there on that front. But at the very least, I think he's going to be a quality defender who can play multiple spots and someone that you can put on the base pass late in games. Like there is definitely a role, a major league role for Samad Taylor in his future. So yeah, really like that deal. Number 7 for you. Who's that?
Blake Hunt.
We're also in agreement on that.
Yeah, really fun deal. You go out, you give up Tatum Levens, who is, maybe a 40 catcher on the scouting scale, has some interesting hit abilities. He's a lefty. And you get a guy who Tampa obviously was trying to clear 40-man space. They knew that this guy was going to get drafted in the Rule 5. And they didn't want to add him because Tampa does have an actual 40-man crunch. And so Seattle, instead of, kind of waiting around and being like, well, we'll see if we can get him in the Rule 5. Like, no, we're just going to go get him now. We like this guy. There are a ton of Tom Murphy vibes when you talk to people about Blake Hunt.
Yeah.
He is a right-handed hitter. He's an above average. At the very least, I haven't heard anybody say that he is worse than average defensively.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of above average defensively with above average raw power. Seems to handle the slider really well. And it's just a matter of, what's the hit tool? Is it a 30? Is it a 35? Is it a 40? And he just feels like he's going to be a very solid backup catcher. And for the first time since that 2019 squad, the Mariners have 3 catchers that you feel pretty good about in terms of like their major league quality catchers. I mean, obviously you don't need Austin Nolan, Tom Murphy, and Omar Narvaez when you have one Cal Raleigh.
Right.
Like he's going to handle a bulk of it, but this is a position that's really important. In the last couple of years, we've seen them have to call up, Brian O'Keefe and Jose Godoy and
who's
Joe Odom.
Who is that one guy? Veteran guy, Andrew Knapp.
Yeah, Andrew Knapp.
Yeah.
So it's good to have somebody like this in your system. Again, it didn't cost you a ton. You get him for 6 years, and there's a good chance he develops into just like a really good backup catcher who in a pinch could be your everyday guy if Cal hits the IL, God forbid, for a couple of weeks or a month. Like you have some offensive upside out of your catcher spot and pretty good defensive floor.
Yeah, I love the upside of this deal, and there might come a point where Blake Hunt is pretty important. Taking advantage of the Rays 40-man roster crunch is something that I wanted the Mariners to do because I mean the Rays always have a 40-man roster crunch every offseason, it seems. they haven't really done that in previous years. So for them to do that and compound that with also taking advantage of the Royals essentially having a 40-man roster crunch, even though they really don't, but the Samad Taylor deal was essentially that as well, to make room for Adam Frazier. Love that they made both of those deals. Love that they saw an opportunity there to get a really interesting player and took it. So yeah, love what that represents. So number 6, I think we're also in agreement on this.
Maybe, I don't know.
Who
I had
is it?
trade for Luis Urias.
We are then, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I know a lot of people thought that they overpaid for him, but it's like, again, this is a guy who's a year removed from being an everyday player. You get him for 2 years, and you have the hole at third base. I mean, at the time they didn't. Remember, at the time this happened before the Geno trade, so people thought this was going to be a second base platoon with Rojas, and no, he's the starting third baseman for now, at least on paper. But yeah, this is taking a shot on a guy who's been a good, productive hitter in the past, and it cost you an asset of which you replaced and then some, and you seemingly grow on trees. You don't grow position players on trees. At least the Mariners don't yet. So I like the deal when they made it. I like it more now. That you see the whole picture. So yeah, I mean, to me, there's very little to complain about. Like, yeah, I liked Isaiah Campbell. I was on the hype train when they drafted him. I wanted them to take Isaiah Campbell in the second round in 2019. So I liked the pitcher, and he was good. He was valuable for you, but you got a potential everyday third baseman for a middle reliever that you were going to replace in-house or with a minor league free agent signing anyways. So there's just very little downside to this trade. And unless you think Isaiah Campbell is like a high leverage arm for the next 4 or 5 years, there's really nothing to complain about with this deal. And like I feel pretty comfortable that Urias is going to come back and be like a 105 to 115 WRC plus guy and play pretty solid defense at third base.
I love this deal. The more that I thought about it, I love this deal even more.
Always give it time. Colby's always right.
Well, you also got to give it time, especially for the full picture to ultimately develop, right? And now with the full picture in front of us, it's like, this is really, really interesting. It's a very, very interesting shot to take because we're talking about a former top prospect who already has two win seasons under his belt. So essentially was an everyday player by that standard. And last year, it was terrible, but it was also completely derailed by multiple injuries throughout the entire course of the year. He also gets traded midseason. There were so many reasons to come to the conclusion that is an outlier year for Luis Urias, especially on the injury front. It would be more of a concern if Luis Urias was 32 years old, right, and had all those injuries. We're talking about a 26-year-old here.
Yep.
What were you going to say?
I was just going to say also he's 26 years old.
Right, yeah.
So it's not like his skill set should be declining.
Yeah, so I think the upside here is very high. I think Luis Urias could have a 3-win season, and I wouldn't be surprised by it. I think the safer bet is like 1.5, 2 wins.
I just find it really hard to imagine that he's not going to be worth the $5 million salary. That they gave him. So
agreed.
There's just basically no downside to this trade. So it's hard to rank it much lower than this.
All right, we are going to be ranking our top 5 Mariners moves of the winter in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. With football officially in the books and some time before baseball gets underway, why don't you try your hand at betting on some hoops? Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. That's FanDuel.com/LOCKDON. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen as we rank all of the Mariners 40-man roster moves this winter. We are now in our top 5. Colby, which move is number 5 on your list?
The Robbie Ray for Mitch Haniger trade.
Another one that we're in agreement on.
The Robbie Ray deal is really the super fascinating one. It's probably the one that is like the most interesting because they give up Robbie Ray. they get Mitch Haniger, they get Desclafani. Desclafani doesn't stick around long, but you are able to use him in another trade, which is nice. That he had value to you,
Mhm.
even though he never pitched for you. So that does kind of go into the equation here. But essentially, the reason this is a really good trade is obviously we love Mitch Haniger. He might be a Mariner Hall of Famer. Like, it's probably not, but he might be. But obviously, he's very well loved in that clubhouse. He's well loved by the fan base and all that stuff, and that's all great. That's fine and dandy. But they traded Robbie Ray. They added 2 contracts, didn't add a dime of payroll to their 2024 number,
Yeah.
and actually shed about $8-ish million from next year's payroll. And then in 2026, they shed $25 million.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this deal, while it is mostly about freeing up future payroll, it is also about, hey, let's get Haniger in here. Let's get some, excitement in the clubhouse. Let's get a guy that we're familiar with and a guy who, if healthy, is going to produce. I don't have really any concerns that Haniger, when he plays, is going to be a productive player. My concerns are how often can he play?
Right.
And when you trade Robbie Ray, a guy who's not going to play for you, like 0% chance he plays for you until at least the All-Star break, and probably just as good of odds that he doesn't play for you at all this year. When that's what you give up to get these 2 guys, it's a really smart and creative deal by Jerry and Justin, and it's a great way to clear future payroll space and kind of reallocate that money to, I know they've said like reallocate it to offense, like we want to balance how much we're spending on pitching and blah blah blah. It's like, okay, but you could also reallocate that money to George Kirby in an extension, or Robbie or
Right.
Logan Gilbert in an extension, like. So yeah, I just think that was a creative deal. I think it's really savvy. I don't know why the Giants made it, to be perfectly honest, but whatever, because they didn't save any payroll. So they must really think Robbie Ray is going to bounce back next year.
Yeah.
Maybe he does, and if he does, I'm happy for him. But it's not going to hurt the Mariners whatsoever if Robbie Ray bounces back, because he wasn't really going to help you this year. Like, it's not even fair to predict that he would have helped you this year. So this is
Right.
just a savvy deal.
In addition to everything you said, from a pure vibes perspective, I felt like this trade was necessary. You brought this up to Aaron Goldsmith, especially with the loss of leaders and clubhouse guys this offseason, just over the last calendar year. Bringing back Mitch, I think, was very important just from that perspective alone. And I think Mitch can contribute. The only question here is, can he stay healthy? And that's a big, 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 massive question. But on top of that, I was concerned about how the presence of Robbie Ray's contract in 2025 and 2026 was going to impact things. So to eliminate some of that concern specifically in 2026 is a massive win for them, because you don't know how he's going to bounce back from Tommy John surgery. And if you're paying $25 million in 2026 for a guy that's pitching at a number 4, number 5 level, that's bad.
Yeah.
That's really, really bad. So to be able to just eliminate that from the equation, massive win. Now, you're on the hook for 17 to Mitch this year, and 17, I think, next year as well. That's kind of its own problem, but that's less of a problem than what I just mentioned with Ray, and one that's not going to last as long as the problem that you had, or a potential problem at least that you had with Ray.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so number 4.
Number 4 for me is simple: signing Mitch Garver. Just money, and you get one of the best raw hitters on the market for $12 million. We see Soler just got 14. We saw Turner get like 13. Like, I would bet on Garver's bat before I would bet on those 2 guys' bat. But it's just a good signing. Like, there's really nothing to complain about here. He's DH. It was Christmas Eve when we learned about this, and it's just money. Like, there's no concern here. They were able to save a little, we think, by adding in a 3rd-year option, and that kind of freed up a little bit more salary relief for 2024's payroll. So there's just not really a ton to complain about. I mean, especially since they went out and they added another kind of middle of the order bat, maybe 2, depending on how you feel about those guys.
Right.
So you can make an argument that Garver is the second best position player they brought in, which I think is pretty good considering all the landmines that Justin and Jerry had to walk around this offseason. So I just like, how do you complain about signing Mitch Garver? I can't come up with anything.
Yeah. Number 4 for me is actually the Polanco deal. Because I really love the Garver signing. I love the Polanco deal as well. The next 4 are pretty interchangeable for me. I love the Polanco deal. Obviously, like, losing Topa sucks, and I really like Darren Bowen, but I'm not losing sleep over that at all either. You got arguably the best second baseman that was feasibly available this offseason. A very, very, very weak market at that position, and you were able to get essentially the top guy there. That's a massive, massive win for the Mariners. Yeah, it's a lot in terms of just quantity, but I don't really care about the return from the Mariners' point of view. I'm totally fine with that. And you potentially get Polanco for not just this year, but also next year, if he hits well enough this year. I think they're probably going to pick up that option. I mean, we'll see money and John Stanton and blah 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 blah. All the caveats that we need to add,
Right,
but
but it's only $12 million.
yeah,
Like,
you are getting a guy though that, well, and also, right, if you don't necessarily get the power output that you want out of third base from Luis Urias and Josh Rojas, which I think there is a chance that you actually will, but if you don't, Polanco is more than capable of making up for that at a position that doesn't really produce a lot of power output. So I also really like that aspect of it as well. It also just makes your infield more dynamic in terms of how you can move around these pieces. I love that deal because, again, we talked about this when they made this trade. Like a week before they made this trade, we were talking about Whit Merrifield and Tim Anderson, and instead they go out and get an all-star caliber second baseman. It was awesome.
Yeah, it's number 3 for me for all the reasons you said. Also, just because, like, again, this is a statement trade to the clubhouse. Yeah. We believe in you, because we were all prepared to just sign Whit Merrifield and be like, okay, pretty good offseason considering. And nope, they went out, they got an all-star caliber player, and this is what winners do. This is what teams that want to win the World Series, they make trades like this. So yeah, I mean, I'm not losing sleep over anything they lost. I thought Gonzalez was the most overrated prospect in baseball. Still a good prospect, but overrated. And yeah, I don't care that they had to spend a little bit of money to get the deal through, because, like, we complained all offseason that the Mariners weren't willing to spend money, and they do it to push this Polanco trade through, and people lost their mind. They turned this trade from like a B plus, A minus into like a C plus, because they gave up $6 million or $8 million or whatever it was. Right. And like, have you lost your mind?
Right.
So yeah, it's number 3 for me.
Yeah. So number 3 is signing Garver, for all the reasons that you mentioned. And I'm hopeful. Obviously, there's a lot of injury concerns here that come with Garver as well, like with Haniger. But I'm hopeful that if they don't play him in the field, you can actually get 120-ish games out of Mitch Garver this year. And if you do, Garver has proven to be, on a consistent basis, one of the best hitters in all of baseball, one of the best power hitters in all of baseball. Mariners DHs posted a 92 WRC plus in 2023. That was 8th worst in the league. Garver's career WRC plus is 123. If he hits just that, which he's gone well beyond that mark several times, if he just does that, that's a 31% increase. Again, you have no reason to play him in the field right now, so he can just be the pure full-time DH, and at that point, I think he's going to be able to stay healthy unless something freakish happens to him. Knock on wood. And if you do get relatively a full season out of Mitch Garver, he might be an all-star.
I mean, all of a sudden, DH in the American League, you could be an all-star there, because somebody's not here anymore, and Jordan's an outfielder now, so like, maybe. But yeah, I like the Garver signing. Obviously, I don't think anybody actually hates it.
Nope.
Number 2 for me is the Gregory Santos trade.
Okay.
Yeah, you get 5 years of a guy, and the best player you give up is a guy that you hope is Santos sometime in the next 3 to 5 years.
Right.
Like, you get Santos now for a guy who you were hoping might be Santos in a year or two, and you only have to sacrifice 1 year of club control to do it, and like a 5th outfielder in Deloach, and the 69th pick in what is like a B minus draft at best. Like, I think I've seen some people say this is like the worst draft class in like the last 5 years. Like it's
Right.
not good.
Yeah.
So they give up one extra year of potential Gregory Santos for Gregory Santos.
Hmm.
So we'll see how the elbow is. Again, all we've heard is that they fully expect him to get into half a dozen or so spring training games, and he should be ready for
Mhm.
close to a full workload on opening day. So there's not a ton of concern there for me. I like this deal, and again, very little to complain about.
Number 2 for me is the Luke Raley trade. You got Luke Raley, who during the first half of last year was one of the best hitters in the entire American League. Just absolutely popped off. I think he was posting like a 170 WRC plus or something insane like that over the first half. Second half did fall off. But if you're looking for the Jared Kelnick replacement, I think this is your guy. And all it cost you was a guy that was possibly not making your roster, and Jose Caballero, who really fun last year and was very, very important for you last year too, but kind of fell off towards the second half of the season, similar to Rayleigh, but fell off to the point where it was pretty clear that Scott Service wasn't comfortable even playing him unless he absolutely had to. And again, I don't think it was a slam dunk that he was making this roster, even with how things stood at the time that the trade was made, which think about the way the roster looked back then.
Yeah.
So love that deal. I don't know if it'll work. I don't know if, the first half of Rayleigh or like even 70% of that will get that out of Rayleigh in Seattle. Maybe the second half version of Rayleigh is who he is, and he's a below average hitter. But taking this shot for what it costs, massive, massive, massive W for the Mariners. Massive.
Yeah. Rayleigh's number one for me. Just because, again, like it cost you a guy who was, I think, somewhat surprisingly to some fans, a DFA candidate. Because Jose Caballero is basically Samad Taylor. Like basically the same, steal some bags, not a lot of pop, play a couple positions. Cabby probably better defensively, but he's just a dude. He was behind Dylan Moore. He's behind Rojas. He's now behind Polanco. He's probably going to be behind Taylor. Like he's just didn't have a path to making this team. And you were able to trade him for a guy who finished the year last year, first half, second half, however you want to split it. He finished the year at a 130 WRC plus.
Yeah.
And he's, an average defender in the corner. He's got left-handed pull power, which is what you want. And again, like he's just started his big league career. He's 29 years old, but he's barely graduated from rookie status. So and you get that guy for, I think Rayleigh has 5 years of club control left. So, you trade a guy who's, 6 years of a guy you're not going to use, who had been pushed down the depth chart further and further. At the end of last season, even he got pushed further down, and then they continue to add to that. Then you get that guy and you trade him for a guy who might be an everyday player for you. There's no downside to this. Even if Caballero is a 2-win player regularly, it's well worth the risk. And it's a really smart move by Justin and Jerry to kind of like recognize it. And of course, we talked about Tampa all winter long. We talked about Arozarena, and we talked about Ramirez, and we talked about Yandy. And of course, they found the one guy that we didn't spend a lot of time talking about.
We talked about him a little, but
a little, but we were thinking like, this is going to cost you like, it's 5 years of this guy. Like,
right.
They might ask for Brian Wu.
Right.
And you got him for Jose Caballero. Like no kicker. That's it.
Yeah. Love it.
I mean, there's literally nothing to complain about with that trade.
So number one for me is the Gregory Santos trade, which is my favorite trade by this front office since the Luis Castillo deal a couple of years back, which slim pickings. So it's not really as bold of a statement as I'm probably making it sound like, but still, this is, I mean, you said it, right? The best player you traded in this deal is someone that you hope is Gregory Santos one day. On top of that, you give up a fourth, fifth outfielder type in Deloach, and then a glorified third round pick, and you lose some bonus pool money on that front because of the loss of the pick. But like you mentioned, this is considered to be one of the worst drafts in a while. So don't care about that, frankly. We had talked so much about the Mariners getting that third guy, that third high leverage guy in this bullpen to go along with Brash and Munoz. And we got to a point there where it was like, okay, I don't think they're going to do it. right? We talked so much about guys like Robert Stevenson, and then Stevenson signed, and some of the other guys signed. And it was like, okay, well, it looks like they're just going to trust their pitching development, which has been great, and they've been able to, churn out relievers, more so mid-leverage relievers than high-leverage relievers. But nevertheless, they've been able to turn out a ton of quality relievers throughout their just within their organization. And, we were talking about Baroa possibly being that guy, Vargas possibly being that guy, Kowar possibly being that guy. But instead they said, you know what? Screw it. Let's do one more thing. And let's go big.
It's a move that winners make.
If you went into the opening day with your bullpen just being the way that it was before the Santos trade, okay, fine. And I think if the Mariners have earned the benefit of the doubt with anything, it's at the very least, it's with the bullpen, right? If you're even the biggest Jerry DiPoto and Justin Hollander detractors, you have to admit that they've been pretty good with the bullpen and been very good at being able to figure it out. Even if it doesn't work out initially, that they're going to figure it out at some point and that they're going to be able to put the pieces all together. So had they not made this addition, I would have been like, okay, fine. But the fact that they did, sick. Like, this put my hype levels for the season through the roof, which I know is insane to say just about a reliever when they've added an everyday second baseman, they've added a full-time DH, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Gregory Santos is one of the most exciting young relievers in all of baseball. He has disgusting stuff. And that took a really good bullpen to possibly be in the very best. So that's going to do it for us. We've been well over time. Probably going to trim some of this down a little bit so we don't get an email from the corporate overlords, as we love to call them. That's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby
man.
Right. Chill. For Colby Patnode, I'm Tiding Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Tiding Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Thank you again for making us your first listen. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.